All right. Hey,
Hey, Matt.
David Settles, Pastor Settles, how you doing?
I'm good, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
I'm been just, living in these interesting times we got.
Very interesting times. Very interesting times.
Yes. Um and I wanted to get you on here because you've got a lot of interesting opinions yourself. Um I should start out to say if anybody doesn't know, David Settles is Murfreesboro City School Board member
Yeah.
since 2016.
Yeah.
You are you
2016. I came on in 16. It's time for me to run again, except, you know, I don't have any competition, so that's good.
yeah. Well, that's all right. So, so we're glad that you're on the city school board. We need good people on the city school board, of course,
Absolutely. Thank you.
who are actually thinking about education,
Yes.
um, the education of our kids.
Hmm.
But that's not why I got you on here today. I wanted to talk to you because, of course, we're dealing with difficult times.
Yeah.
The coronavirus is still affecting a lot of people.
Sure.
I've got a lot to say about our officials' response to that, our elected leaders' response to that
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
on every level. But we don't have to go into too much detail of that today because we've got another big issue right now, which is because of George Floyd's killing, because of Breonna Taylor,
Hmm.
because of the young man in Georgia who was
Yeah.
hunted down. This has sparked a
Ahmaud
new.
Aubrey.
What's that?
Ahmaud Aubrey.
Yes, thank you.
Hmm.
Um, this has sparked new interest, new protests into how our police are treating folks, particularly people who are Black or African American
Hmm.
or Hispanic. Studies have shown that if you are um, a person of color as opposed to a white person, you're three
Hmm.
times more likely to be pulled over, to
Yeah.
be arrested for something frivolous, and to die, to be shot and killed over something frivolous.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
um, you know, right now in Nashville, we have had a couple of those instances in the past couple of years. I know
Yes.
Jacques Clemens, I think his name was
Jacquees Clemens.
Jacques.
Yeah.
Um,
Justice for Jacquees.
yes, and I forgot the other guys. Daniel Hambrick,
Hambrick. Yes.
Hambrick, maybe is his name.
Hambrick. Yeah.
Um, and those are still pretty fresh. So I guess what I'm trying to say is Nashville might not have a lot of similar problems to some of the bigger cities like Minneapolis, but they
Hmm.
do. They do,
Yeah.
maybe just on a smaller scale.
Yeah. We
And,
don't escape.
right. And, something that I've noticed learning more about Rutherford County, learning more about
Hmm.
Nashville is how segregated we still are in a lot of senses,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the investment of the money. I definitely
Right.
heard that when I was helping out some candidates for council last year in Nashville.
Hmm.
That was a very interesting thing to see people say, "Well, I've been here for 30 years, and they were supposed to, fix this road 20 years ago, and they
Yeah.
still haven't." And it was very obvious that Nashville has spent a lot of priority on the downtown area and making
Yeah.
it nice for tourists, which is great. But
Hmm.
at the same time, there's a lot of places that are being ignored. And we definitely see that in Murfreesboro, Rutherford County.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You know, how do you feel about what's going on right now? How do you feel about, what's happening in Nashville, what's happened in Murfreesboro? It's kind of an open-ended question, but I just want to kind of get your take on everything.
Yeah. It's been a rough couple of weeks, I guess, nationwide, and for myself, even personally. Um, I'm going on 2 weeks now. I think that my best friend, he was my best man in my wedding. And some of you will remember there was an incident a couple of Thursdays ago on Interstate 840, and it was shut down. And they were like, there's been a police incident, there was a chase, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that happened to be my best friend that was shot and killed by police. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I bring that up because um, of the way that the situation started. which is very sketchy. He was sleeping in a car in the church parking lot, and allegedly an off-duty police officer was just walking his dog, and for no reason at all, my friend allegedly gets out and shoots him. None of that makes sense, but this is what he's reporting. He shot him in his shoulder, and then he jumped in the car and ran away. Um, it just sounds really strange that somebody with no reason would just shoot you, unarmed, dog walking, off duty police officer. The other interesting part is the amount of manpower that they put into pursuing him, which was they brought out the helicopters and there were cars and all of this stuff to chase down somebody that shot somebody in the shoulder. I thought it was interesting because they don't generally put that much manpower behind, you know, much anything. It was just odd.
Right.
And then it ended up in a shootout and that type of thing. But it was kind of emblematic of a lot that we have going on dealing with police overreach and overkill, and this
Mhm.
whole insular society that exists behind the badge. And I'm not anti-police. I'm the last person from anti-police, but we have to be honest. And I think what in our society we have gotten to is we kind of abdicate all of our morality, all of our everything to people who seem to be in authority. You can see that from the White House. So
Right.
it's like whatever they say is good, we're going to go with it, and we don't question. And I think that's really dangerous, Matt. I think that's a dangerous way to be. And I'm a man of faith. I'm a faith leader, and I know there's a lot of people that maybe you don't have a faith tradition. That's fine, but a lot of people on the conservative side, the Republican side, however you want to look at it, kind of abdicate a lot of that and say, well, we are supposed to obey authority and this and that, and just he's the president, so we got to do what he says, and he's God's man. All of these things, and they sound really good and sound real wholesome and biblical until you read the Bible, because the
Yeah.
scripture doesn't bear out what they're espousing. I'll
Right.
just bring this to your attention, the story of Nathan and David, which you may know, maybe you've heard it before or it's been a while. But David had committed a
King
great
David.
sin. He took Uriah's wife, had Uriah killed, and all those types of things, and got his wife pregnant. And so this was grave. This was a horrible injustice that had been done. So Nathan was the prophet, and Nathan, being a man of God, went to David and told him in a roundabout way. He told him a story and all of that, and told him that he had sinned. He called him into question for what he had done. This is what's lacking on our political scene right now. Nobody wants to call into question the things that are done by those that are elected, because we abdicate and say, "Oh, well, they're in authority, so we got to obey." No, 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 no. We are to question and help hold people to account for the
Right.
decisions that they make. It only makes sense that those that hold these very high positions and of morality and authority and all of that, that they got to abide by the same rules, and they're required, you know, to uphold a standard. So we're
Right.
dealing with some crazy stuff. What was your
Yes.
question?
Well, it was like kind of you answered it for the most part. I mean, I wanted to learn a little bit about your experiences, and
Yeah.
and we did talk about that, recently. And I'm so sorry. I had no clue about your friend. I'm really sorry to
Yeah.
hear that.
And
That's
actually
awful to
forgot
hear.
I forgot to mention that when we talked before. But yeah, that's very fresh and raw in
Right.
my mind, and it's because it's so present. But
Mm.
the sad thing is, I'm not by myself in being able to relate stories like that. And I'll go even further, and that is that policing has gotten to be almost a terroristic type of deal with in some communities. I'm not just talking, and a lot of times when people say, minority communities, we automatically just think black, but you got to think
Mhm.
about black, Hispanic, Asian,
Right.
anybody who's not a part of the overall majority culture, which would be Caucasian or white.
Right.
We moved here into Murfreesboro, I guess 15, 16 years ago. And I told my boys, I have two sons, and I told them, I called them in my room. I sat them down. I said, listen, let me tell you something. We are in Rutherford County. We're in Murfreesboro, and this is a very different place than where you grew up, because we grew up in or they grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. And I said, now in Jackson, Mississippi, there was black people. We had tons of black people,
Yeah.
so there was more.
Yeah.
But I told him, I said, let me tell you something, and I want you to hear me and listen to me. The system is not fair. It is not designed for you. Don't ever get in the system. You were born with two strikes against you. I told him this. I said, you're born with two strikes against you. Number one, you're born male. Number two, you were born black. That means that you got a target on your back. So you've got to keep yourself clean. You got to make sure that you do the right thing all the time, because they're going to be watching you.
Right.
And I wasn't telling them to scare them per se, but to warn them. And it has come to pass. I mean, we are disproportionately targeted um, by police, by regular citizens, by restaurant managers, by grocery store clerks. We're targeted everywhere we go, and it has become something almost unbearable. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the unrest that you're seeing.
Right. And that's a good point. It's not just in, policing. It's in multiple things, right? And
Yes.
it's even in healthcare,
Yeah,
medical professionals, or health insurance,
absolutely.
housing. There's, of course, food deserts.
Yeah,
There's disparity and those kinds of things. And really, at the heart of that is we're underinvesting in some communities,
absolutely. Yes,
while we're overinvesting in the militarization of our police force.
absolutely. Yeah. More body
And
armor.
right. And I was not a part of the protest. I'm glad that there were the silent vigil, as they called it.
Yes,
That was good to see a lot of people come out and hold up signs and talk
yeah,
about why coming out and getting
right.
some attention on this issue is important. Unfortunately, it did end with some, what I would say, an escalation by the police.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it did not get any worse, but they,
But not because of them.
yeah, not because of them, right? They did say there was a window broken at like Whiskey Dick's, but I've also heard someone say, "When is there not a window broken at
I was
Whiskey?"
gonna say, yeah, that's pretty common.
Yeah, no, but
That's not a cause for alarm.
right. At one point, they said, "Oh, there's a curfew at
Yeah,
6:30." It was
yeah.
6:45 or whatever when they
Right,
said,
right, right, right.
and they definitely tear gassed some people that were trying to shut down intersections around MTSU. I'm not saying that's great or anything, but that's a little bit understandable compared to the group on the square that was literally doing nothing, that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
sitting there peacefully
yeah,
protesting.
yeah,
Again, thankfully, the situation died down, but that was an escalation. I mean, that situation could have gotten worse because
yeah.
of that.
That's almost a provocation, because simply shutting down an intersection does not necessarily or usually call for tear gas,
Right.
to disperse. I think what happened even in that incident, or in that instance, a lot of times, um, although the federal government does not do local policing, a lot of what happens on the local level, they kind of get marching orders from above. And it doesn't come directly like them sending down orders. If you see protesters, tear gas them. No. But what they do is listen to the rhetoric. They listen to the talk from the top, from the president on down,
Right.
and they kind of follow suit or fall lockstep. That's very, very dangerous. It's dangerous because even if we look at what happened in Minneapolis, the tactics that they had used in Minneapolis should not necessarily be deployed here in Murfreesboro, because you're dealing with two different situations. You're dealing
Right.
with a smaller population, you're dealing with a less volatile population, all of these types of things. We're far removed from where George Floyd was killed. However, we're still concerned, but you're not going to act in the same way as far as policing in our area as you would there, because you're dealing with two different scenarios. And I think we lose sight of that, and we kind of paint everything with one brush stroke, and we act like everything should be dealt with in the same way. And that's where a lot of the problem is. And I think when we talk about funding and we talk about how much of our budget goes, and in every city's budget, generally speaking, in every city's budget, the top two line items, or the biggest share of that budget, is going to be policing and education. And too often, education comes way behind what policing gets. And there's a disproportionate amount that's given in that area, because the theory is the more money you throw at it, the better the policing is going to be. But that has not been borne out in public policy. It hasn't been borne out in the real world. So we're doing things that seem to, make sense. But I'm going to tell you something that's very cheap, very inexpensive, that can happen, that will help us in our policing efforts. And that is a community oversight board, or
Yes.
any type of accountability board. I would like to see Murfreesboro implement something like that. And whenever you talk about community oversight, people on the side of policing, and I'm on the side of policing, but a lot of people jump up and down and say, oh, no, you don't need. Why would you not have a board that can oversee what goes on in a police department?
Right.
After all, these are our tax dollars that pay for the police department. Remember, they work for us.
Right.
But it always brings about consternation and people crowing about not letting the police do their work. No, we're not stopping them. The only thing that happens is we're asking you, the police department, to obey what you set out, your own rules.
Right.
And that's very simple. Obey your own rules. Follow the rules that are set in place for you to follow. That's what community oversight is about. It's not about coming in and trying to rewrite the police department. It's about making sure that equitable policing is done across the board.
Right. You make a good point. And, I was thinking about, doctors, if they are found negligent,
Yeah.
and have caused someone's death,
Yeah.
they can't just pack their bags and move, across state
Right.
lines,
Yeah.
and get a job as a doctor there,
Yeah. It follows you.
And the same should be known for police. If there's
Yeah.
someone who is negligent,
Yeah.
they shouldn't, and they shouldn't just pack up and get a job right down the
Right.
street.
Yeah.
And I think, who was it? There was one of those officers, maybe it was the one in Minneapolis who killed George Floyd, or maybe it was a different one. They found that over the 3 or 4 year term that he had worked for the police force, 79 different times did they investigate him for aggressive use of force.
Yeah.
So that's someone who shouldn't have been on the police force at all. These are the people who are supposed to be protecting us.
Exactly.
And instead,
this aggressive use of force it's gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
It's gotten to the place that it's no longer to protect and serve. It seems like, to frisk and kill. And that's a sad commentary. And again, I'll say, this over aggressive policing is not only limited to the minority culture, but as I was reading the other day down in Winchester, the young man that was pursued by police from Decker to Winchester,
Right.
and he jumped out of his car and ran to the lake and jumped in and began to drown. And the body cam, the policeman's body cam, showed this, and it captured it. And he's crying out for help. And one of the police officers responded back that it was his own fault because he jumped in the lake. And so one of the other junior, I guess not as high ranking police officers, was going to go in, attempted to go in to rescue the guy. And his sergeant told him, no, you're not to go in and get this guy. And the man literally drowned before their eyes. I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
I have a real hard time. As a human being, I have a hard time with that. But And again, we know, and don't write me, don't send me any emails or get on my Facebook and tell me there's 1,000 good cops for every one bad one. I know about good police officers. I have family in law enforcement. I'm a law-abiding citizen myself. All of that I understand. But when we do not highlight, when we do not bring to fore, when we do not hold accountable those that are the bad actors, then we become complicit with them in their bad acting. So every good cop ought to be standing up saying, this is a travesty. It
Right.
shouldn't just be that those of us that are not completely involved have to say something about it. But if there's thousands of good cops, they need to step forward and say, you know what? This was wrong. This was murder. Be real all the way across. And forget this whole brotherhood of the badge. When somebody does wrong, you got to call them out for it.
Right.
Because other than that, this thing is just going to fester. It's going to build. It's going to grow. And then when people have had as much as they can take, we're going to get some of the results that we've been getting, which is rioting, which is looting, which is lawlessness, and all of these things. And then everybody's going to shake their head and say, oh, what a shame. Oh, that's terrible. How dare they do that? Well, nothing else seems to be getting the attention of those that make the decisions. So people do, as Martin Luther King said, riot is the language of the unheard. It is the message. That's how they get their attention, is
Right.
by rioting. And, sorry that it happens like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about 1992. I was a young lad, and I didn't know what was happening in LA during that time.
Yeah.
I didn't get that.
Yeah.
And I remember what Rodney King said, not from his lips, because it was a joke. It was like, I think it was like in Family Matters. I think Steve Urkel said, can't we all get along?
Can we all just get along?
Remember that?
Yeah.
And that was,
Yeah.
it was kind of a joke. And, some of us kids used to say it to each other.
Can we all just get along?
It wasn't until years later, I actually saw that clip of Rodney King saying that. And he is heartbroken. I mean, he is desperate. He is just like, come on now. Can't we all get along? I mean, he is at the end of his rope. And it just made me think about how we have treated this entire situation, because it wasn't that people were angry for a legitimate reason and that's why they rioted. It was, it was, oh, they're all like that, right? And
exactly.
And that's what happens, and they're all going to, steal from each other and loot in stores, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the narrative that came out with that. But every single kind of protest that has turned into that has been for a legitimate reason.
Right. There's a reason behind it. I didn't just wake up. Nobody just woke up one day and said, hey, I think I'll go looting today. There's a reason behind it.
Right.
And we spend so much, we spend so much time looking at the action that happened and not enough time looking at what precipitated the action. And that's where we fall short, even as a society. And it becomes one of those things. And this is kind of endemic of policing in general. And not just, when I say policing, I'm not just talking about police officers. I mean, in general, we treat what we see, but we don't want to get to the root cause. You understand what I'm saying? I'll use myself as an example. I suffer with diabetes. Okay, I suffer with diabetes. I go to the doctor. The doctor tells me, you got diabetes. Your blood sugars are out of whack. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to treat this by giving you more insulin. Well, that's fine. But what is the root cause? What's causing me to have this reaction? Let's treat that. Then we don't have to spend so much time on treating the symptoms. And that's what people are talking about when they're talking about funding. Because if we spent more on homelessness, if we spent more on education, if we spent more on community outreach and teaching people and going where people are and actually giving them the help that they need in these poverty situations, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be happening anyway. But we're so easily to just pull up, I'll use a church reference because I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, so that's where I go. But it's very easy for pastors to simply lay out a bunch of rules. Don't do this, don't do that, don't go here and don't go there. Because it's easier than telling you all of the backstory of why you shouldn't, of why it's damaging, of why it's hurtful, all of those things. That takes years of teaching and days of teaching and weeks of teaching. It's easier, just like when you have kids. It's easier for you to tell your kids, hey, don't eat all those cookies.
Yeah.
Why can't I eat the cookies? It's easier to say, hey, don't eat the cookies because I don't want you to eat them, than to say, okay, if you eat the cookies, you're gonna uh, set yourself off balance. You won't feel like eating your real food that you need to eat, and then your stomachs are gonna be, it's a long, drawn out thing to have to go through all of that. It's much easier to round up a bunch of black guys to figure out which one of them did it than to actually work on the problem that causes the robbery, that causes the violence, that causes people to say, I'm going to have to sell drugs to make a living. It's easier just to treat the symptom. Jails are a symptom of what goes on. Heavy policing is just a symptom of what has gone on in our society. All of these things are just symptoms of what has happened in our world. We haven't treated the root cause, and it takes too much effort. It takes too much time. It's not glamorous. It's not pretty. You don't get to use a gun to do this. You got to do real teaching. You got to do real investment. You got to really sit down with people and make it right with them. The civil rights movement that started in the 60s, it was birthed out of people just being frustrated enough to say, I can't do this anymore. So what do?
Right.
We just legislate. Oh, just put them all together. Okay, now we're going to. It doesn't work that easily. That's why racism still exists, because there was never any coming together, a meeting of the minds of those that saw it differently. I've got to be able to sit down with my white brother and my white sister and get an understanding of why you see me the way that you do. And let's come together. But
Right.
rather than do that, we just throw legislation at it. But let me tell you something. You can never legislate love. You cannot make people love people. And love is the cure. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not puffed up. It does all of those things. But you can't really legislate that.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
I'm
Well,
preaching. I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. It's good. It's good. But there is ways I think our
Mhm.
legislators could tackle this.
Sure.
And I've been reading some stuff, and I read something interesting. It said that Murfreesboro City allocates 19% of its budget at least this year, to law enforcement.
Okay.
And that's more than any other public expenditure.
Right.
We spend about 9% on public works, 9% on community services, 12% on public infrastructure.
Hmm.
Um, and we're sitting here, we're saying that we're not against law enforcement. We don't
Right.
think we need to abolish the whole system, but
Right.
we're definitely overfunding that and underfunding other things that
Sure.
could help in these situations.
Sure.
Housing, education, healthcare. We could be spending more on mental health services, on interventions,
Absolutely. Yes.
and this would go a long way to curing our societal problems than just saying, "Oh, just go there and knock some heads around, or
Right.
lock them all up
Absolutely.
and throw away the key."
Yeah.
You remember when people used to think about rehabilitating the people who have been in our prison? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
joke now, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
like once they get go down that road, the deeper they go, the more radicalized they'll come.
Absolutely. Yes.
Even if they've made some mistakes and they have been rehabilitated, they
Hmm.
come out, they can't get a job.
Right. Right.
They're not going to be productive members of society, even if we tell them to as hard as we can. We haven't
Yes.
set them up for success in the
Exactly.
first place.
Exactly. No,
So,
that is emblematic of the problems that exist. Warehousing criminals has never been a real solution. It really hasn't. It's never been a solution, and I think too often. And one of the things that has actually made this situation worse was mandatory sentencing and mandatory minimums. Back in the old days, way back old days, you didn't stay in prison long times like you do now.
Right.
Sentences weren't as long as they are now. They're much longer now than they were. And what that does is it sets up a whole different system because you've been institutionalized. Then when you get out of prison, you don't get any deprogramming, not really. Uh,
Right.
you don't get you don't get treatment for PTSD, but you have been through a traumatic experience after you've
Right.
been in prison for so long. And you come out with a whole different mindset. And that mindset does not gel with what society has going on. So, what we're doing is just producing more of what we had to begin with because we're not helping people to become rehabilitated
Mhm.
because it costs too much money to rehabilitate. It's easier to warehouse. Everybody knows that. It's easier just to put people into a big old warehouse than it is to sit them down, teach them, give them the tools that they need to be successful, show them anger management, show them how to problem solve, all of those things, conflict resolutions. It's easier just to warehouse them. So we have got to start rethinking how we deal with people. And we don't, because, it was at one point where fines and fees were looked at as a deterrent, but it's gotten to the place that fines and fees have come so heavy that they're not really a deterrent. They become slavery
Yes.
because people cannot afford it. And what they have to do is to say, I can't do that, which means you end up in prison, in jail anyway. So now we have what we said we would never have, which is pauper's prison or debtor's prison, because
Right.
people can't pay all these fines. It is ridiculous. It makes me,
Yes,
I'm getting excited. It is so ridiculous
it
that
is.
you would put people in jail because they can't pay a fine. Then when they get out, they can't get a job to pay the fine. And then you want them to pay for the stay that they did in jail because they
Right.
couldn't pay the fine. We're just cycling. It's just like when they put boots on people's cars because it's supposed to be a deterrent. But when you put a boot on the car of a person who didn't have the money to pay the parking meter, what sense
Right.
is it making?
Right.
You're just compounding it. Oh, you don't pay it, we're going to suspend your license. And then get your license back, it's going to cost you $1,000. Well, I
Right.
didn't have the 50 to pay to get the boot off my car. So we're
Right.
just going further down this rabbit hole, but
Mhm.
thinking that we're doing something. And there's a very good chance, hear me well, there's a very good chance that they don't want it to work because we have now become addicted to that fine. Now we are supplying our needs by the fines that we assess to people that they
Right.
cannot pay, but they'll eke out something. So now we've become a society that lives on the backs of criminals. So we really don't want to solve the problem because if we solve the problem, then we got to find another way to make this money up that we're going to lose out of the city coffers because now we don't have people to pay all these fines that we've trumped up against them.
Right. That's a good point. Some of these
So we're
smaller
going in a circle.
towns, some of these smaller towns live off
That,
of those signs, right?
yes,
Traffic,
speed traps,
speed traps. Yep.
number one. Yes,
Right. And I was looking. Robert Reich. You know that guy?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I know the name.
He had something. What did he say? He was like, Trump has gutted all of the enforcement
Mm-hmm.
on corporations from looting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and he,
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that he defunded EPA, they
Oh
defunded
yeah. Yeah.
the Federal Trade Commission, they
Yeah.
defunded the Consumer
Yeah.
Finance Protection Bureau,
Yes.
they defunded the Equal Employment Office,
Exactly.
um, and
The
again,
pandemic response team.
right, right, they don't care about people at the end of the day. They will
Right.
defund anything like that.
Yes.
Um, and meanwhile, we're overfunding law enforcement
Yes.
to a ridiculous amount, and not in the right way. I think about whenever we talk about our military budget, we got the largest military
Yes.
budget in the world.
Yes.
Um, and I'm all about paying
Mm-hmm.
for people who have served our country.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, GI Bill, love it.
Yeah.
Any kind of medical thing, we should give them benefits for
Yes.
life. And
Absolutely.
families are supposed to have that too.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Let's do it.
Right.
Let's pay
Right.
into that. But a lot of times the military budget goes towards, the bomb makers, the missile makers, the
Absolutely. Yes.
CEOs of giant weapons companies and not to the average, soldier that is employed.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, I would say a similar thing with law enforcement. I actually don't think we pay those people enough.
Right.
I do think that those people do need raises because they are, a job that is very dangerous. At the same
Absolutely.
time,
Sure.
we
Yes.
need to we need to make sure that they are learning de-escalation techniques and not, this guy in Minneapolis who had his neck on George Floyd's he had his knee on George Floyd's neck.
Yes.
He had learned that through a warrior training, as they called it, which the police union was all about, and the Minneapolis mayor tried to outlaw. Um, and it was this real kind of warlike mentality
mentality. Yes.
of they're animals and we need to control them,
Absolutely.
any way possible. I mean, and now we're in a situation where Rutherford County has a mine resistant vehicle.
For what?
For what exactly? I don't know. And some people might like to say, oh, well, that's nice that we got it for free. Well, nothing's for free. We still got to pay to maintain that thing.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of money, so I'm glad we got an $18 million mine resistant vehicle that we'll never use unless to scare people. But, how much money are we going to pay to maintain that when we could be spending it on the people who need it?
Well, it does make those of us who have a little knowledge of recent history remember some things that happened way before I was born, but still recent history. If you look at Germany in the lead up to the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, you will remember that everything became militant and military became all. So it was it's very reminiscent of that, because a country that pushes military above everything, just look at North Korea. What they tout is we've got a strong military. Well, they don't have anything else. And
No.
it becomes, the stronger you make the military, the weaker the people become and become more dependent on the military. And the stronger the military becomes, then they no longer stay in their little box. It's like what you feed gets stronger and greater, and then you can't control it anymore. And we have to be very careful that we don't abdicate too much of our civil rule and leadership to the military, which is what the police are turning into. If you look at the recent pictures of the White House, it's disheartening to think that you've got all of this around the White House. It looks like a military bunker in the middle of a war zone. And that's not the look we're trying to go for. The citizens are not the enemy. The press is not the enemy. The Democrats, can I help somebody, is not the enemy. Black people standing up for their rights who say Black Lives Matter, we're not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy. And we got to learn that. Even those that disagree with my political view, they're not my enemy. And the more we can see that, and the less we demonize the other side for how they feel, the better we're going to be able to do, just like he said, can't we all just get along? Because those words were spoken years and years ago. Rodney King, yes, but it was after the rioting, after the turning up. I mean, they tore that city upside down.
Right.
And his plea was, and it was just like looking at, and I was watching recently today, earlier today, and James Baldwin was saying that the problems that I'm facing are from my fellow countrymen. These are my countrymen. This is where I was born, but they hate me. That's very striking, because it's a true sentiment to a lot of people who look like me. Is that I was born in this country, and I've heard people say, go back to Africa. And the interesting thing is, if you research a lot of their family history, we were here before they were. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these people that are saying, go back to Africa, go back to Africa. Well, your family came from Germany in the late 1800s, and mine were here before yours got here. Have you ever thought about how weird that is and ludicrous that you're telling me to go back to my country when in actuality, we were here first?
That's
and before us were the Native Americans or the natives. These people were here first, and we're screaming at people because they don't look like us, because they don't eat like us, because they don't smell like us. And still, we hold up the banner of a Christian nation. I don't know if we
Right.
understand what it means to be a Christian nation if we don't follow Christian principles.
Very, very well said. Um, well, before we go, because I know you can't stay on too long.
Can't stay on too long. I got other stuff.
I know. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
It's been my joy.
I wanted to just briefly touch, because we were just talking about how people can get caught up in this cycle where, you know, their headlight is out, they get this ticket, they get, you know, they can't pay it, their license is suspended.
Yeah.
Now they risk getting more trouble just going to work.
Yeah.
You know, they might end up in jail for just a day, but that could be enough for them to lose their job.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, one day, you know, you know, could be enough money to pay for something. But, you know, you were talking about how we do have modern day debtors prison.
Yes.
And we definitely had that. Well, you know, I want to say we have it now, but, you know, a couple of years ago, we had Providence Corrections Center,
PCC,
you know me, company,
yeah,
private probation company that took advantage of people that didn't have any money. Took advantage of people who couldn't pay their fees, and so then they ended up in 940. They ended up in prison, and it
you
was
violated. You violated
this chain, this cycle. And how do we expect people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps if we're constantly, you know, kneecapping them? If we're constantly doing this, I think that's a conversation that we really haven't had as a larger society. And and you make a really good point. Because, you know, as we learned recently, this has been going on since 1619. I don't know if you read any of that project. It was fascinating. And it was something that, you know, we really don't discuss. I think when it comes to history in our schools, sometimes we kind of go by war to war and just talk about that and not really talk about these larger issues about the people who occupy our country and who make it great. But, you know, we absolutely have a lot of problems. And here in Rutherford County, we definitely have them too. Maybe not as intense as they are in Nashville or another big city, but they're here. And there's things that we could do. And we could ask Murfreesboro to defund, you know, not completely, but, you know, stop over investing in our law enforcement, stop over investing in this militarization, and start investing in people's lives here in Rutherford County. And I think you would absolutely see a huge difference. But, you know, some of the ideas that I've heard recently is like ending cash bail, the decriminalization of low-level drugs, supporting early release of nonviolent offenders. You know, well, this is not one of them, but here's a good point. Wage theft costs our workers billions more than any other kind of, you know, burglaries or robberies or anything else. I learned wage theft. I mean, it's huge. We know we're not paying our people the right wages in the South, in Tennessee. We know we're taking advantage of people. Right to work is right to get fired for any reason.
Absolutely. Tennessee is a right to work state. And I'll put in a plug against Burger King. I mean, Captain D's right now.
All right.
I'll put a plug against them. They will fire you for no reason. And I mean managers. And tell you, well, Tennessee's an at-will employment state. But what did I do? You didn't do anything that we have to share with you. We just want you gone. That's horrible. But it is what we've become. And that is when, I've got to get out of here. That is when we elevate profit over people. And it is the few at the top that benefit. Not the little guy. And that's what's so important. I wish I could make a lot of my Republican friends see that these guys don't care about you. You don't have enough money for them to care about you. They care about their friends and their pockets and not you. So we have to be careful that we don't get sucked into this, you know, oh, no, you're not. Big business is about big business, you know, and I heard somebody say, well, corporations are made up of people. Yeah, we get that. We get that 100%. But if everybody did what they were supposed to do and everybody got just what they needed and not gobbled up the majority of the wealth, we wouldn't have nearly the problems that we have now.
Right. Absolutely agree with that. we can afford it too. We absolutely can afford it.
We can afford it.
Every time,
Absolutely.
every time we talk about spending more money on the people, our Republican legislators go, "We can't afford it. We can't afford it." But all of a sudden, they can find $40 million to try to host the RNC. You know,
Absolutely. Isn't that amazing?
yeah, and this latest budget is still ignoring the coronavirus and not taking that seriously, not taking actually fully funding our unemployment compensation fund that's been poorly funded for years.
Forget the teachers and that little raise that you said you were going to get.
Right.
Not coming. Not going to happen. But remember, teachers, a lot of you voted for them.
Right. But
Matt, I've got to get out of here.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I know you got to get out of here.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Have me back anytime. When you get to be a big timer, don't forget me.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Stacy says, hey.
Hey, Stacy. Good to see you and hear from you.
Yeah. Linda Sullivan said thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now I can see the comments. I couldn't see them earlier. I didn't see anything. We reap what we sow. Hey.
Anyway, just wanted to show you some of those. We got some great fans on here. Thank you so much for showing up, everyone. We appreciate it. And here's Amanda Moore. We love her too. We're glad she's on the city school board.
We love her. Good. We need more and more.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We need more people to run, and we need to change the makeup of this county and this city.
Yeah,
and we can talk more about that later. But thank you so much for being on here today. I appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Go eat some dinner. Sorry to keep you so long from it.
I wish I could eat. I've got to go to another meeting, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, bless you. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. See you.
All right, man. Thanks.